Breaking news. Meghan Markle just faced one of her most humiliating moments yet. Arriving uninvited at HBO Max's star-studded Emmy nominee celebration, she was met not with applause, but with a chorus of loud boos. What happened inside the glittering Hollywood ballroom left everyone stunned. The evening was supposed to glisten with glitter in a way only Hollywood could make it, the type that makes celebrities glitter under a constellation of cameras, flashing lights, and whispers of wonder. The HBO Max sweet promise for Emmy nominees was a night of mixing and matching and toasting and well-wishing on another year of creative brilliance in television. Chandeliers glowed like captured stars, the red carpet had no end, fading honorees with awe. The buzz was palpable, this night a food point in the season of awards, a world of power, influence and privilege that is closely controlled in order to broadcast nothing but an impression of perfection. But for one woman, the night didn't quite turn out as planned. So with all that out of the way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Meghan Markle's persona as a figure who fascinated both Hollywood as well as beyond apparently chose to show up unannounced. With more elegance than she would expect me to give her credit for, and sans invitation, she sails on into the nominees' Emmy bash. Cameras immediately turned on her and a smattering of unwanted whispers swelled throughout the room. When the assembled celebrities discovered Meghan Markle was not invited, it was all eyes on deck as friends and foes alike raised their eyebrows with intrigue and panic. What had been an ebullient mood was replaced by nervous anxiety, a discomfort melding with the glittering excitement. The first sign of disturbance was not about Meghan herself, but the muttering in the crowd around her. Conversations half-slumped mid-sentence as the effete clink of champagne glass began in the distance, a background noise which served only to underscore the mounting tension, even as the air changed a degree. At first it was the minor tensing of the shoulders and the quick glances over at the doorway that tipped them off. And as Meghan ventured farther into the room, collective recognition dawned on the guests, giving way to an audible rumble of disgust that passed through the room. A low murmur quickly turned to a crescendo of boos, jagged and incongruous to the smooth tones of the jazz background music. Cameras, ready to capture every moment, caught every flicker of surprise and every hitch in her step, as if the air suddenly had become heavy with judgment. But the boos were only the first round. Then, in a span of minutes, an abrupt, targeted hack, seemingly planned, disrupted the course of the evening, and the intended program was aborted as screens flashed an unplanned message. Rumors quickly circulated on the internet, setting off a digital storm that resonated on social media with speculation and outrage. To those who wrote off Meghan's unexpected cameo as an awkward moment, audiences now knew the night was becoming much stranger. Meghan Markle's arrival, hardly an understated display of relevance or an obvious fuck you but close enough, had caused an instant, unceasing spike in scrutiny. In order to understand the starkness of this moment and its implications, we need to take a step back and remember how we got here. Once a beloved star of a popular television series, admired for her fashion sense, her poise and her edgy wit, she had become the object of international attention after she married into Britain's royal family. This change had also subjected her to such unprecedented scrutiny, every move she made would be questioned, critiqued, and applauded. Opinion in a significantly divided public was starkly divided, with an admiring and a condemnatory society both standing on delicate balance. Meghan often found herself having to tread a dangerous path when it came to the hazards of fame, balancing the need for caution with the need for boldness. In this context at least, the Emmy bash was something beyond yet another Tinseltown party. It was, rather, a symbolic stage upon which her importance, her influence, her public image could be dissected in the bright illumination of celebrity culture. As she walked deeper into the room, the level of arousal increased and the responses of the people present became increasingly varied. Some looked away, as if shunning the pain, and some spoke rapidly in hushed tones, with deep disbelief and longing. Some brave ones entered on tippy-toe and politely, knowing full well that confrontation would either snuff out or fan into flame. Meghan's calm, neutral tone didn't give much away. It was a kind of self-control that is sharpened over years in the unforgiving glare of cameras and public scrutiny. A talent learned in the glamorous palaces of Hollywood studios and gilded halls of royalty, but no polished mask could protect her from the crackle of energy seething around her. At the same time, the hack added a fresh layer of chaos to the evening. This wasn't just a technical hiccup, it felt almost metaphorical, a digital manifestation of the pushback she was currently experiencing. Information began to trickle out. Then unverified whispers of personal and professional mistakes began circulating on social media, and guests slowly registered that no, this was not just a night of eggnog and conviviality. To bystanders from afar, the ensuing hours played out as a gripping parable of modern celebrity culture, an Icarus-like live-action demonstration of how quickly the tide of public opinion can turn, how admiration can curdle into suspicion, how single audacious uninvited move can set off a series of consequences that reverberate both digitally across the globe and in the physical world below among the throng. Reactions varied, yet were impassioned. Jaded industry types looked at one another meaningfully, full of unspoken judgment, eager no doubt to recall similar situations in which fame had tarnished or reputations had soured in days of yore. Every second of migrants there was documented by social media influencers who uploaded clips and images to be dissected, interpreted, and shared in minutes. Reporters raced to cross-verify, similar to a game of telephone, anxious to get the story before it changed shape, with the Knights holding the tentpoles above the MSM circus as the latest stuff they could throw together now to make it front-page news developed. Meghan Markle Gamble walked into a room she had neither been invited to nor sanctioned. She was being reviewed, criticized, and immortalized on a variety of media, and what should have been an ordinary entrance evolved into a cultural moment of attraction and condemnation. But the human side of the story went overlooked in all the noise. For Meghan, who maintains control of her emotions, it was also a prism of scrutiny, expectations, and instant ramifications. What had impelled her to this sudden entrance? So was it just for attention, or was it a desperate plea of "look at me," or was it demonstrating to both the public and the tabloids that she won't back down without a fight? The queries were plentiful. The solution was to remain inexorably out of reach, however, leaving the live and remote audience to interpret her motives through a filter of media stories, common assumptions, and historical context. Emotions ran high. For Meghan, the evening was more than just a social faux pas. It was a metaphor for the fragility of reputation in a world where attention is currency and adjudication. For those who witnessed it, it was an act that tested etiquette, burrowed into norms and set off responses that ranged from amusement to outright vitriol. For the millions tuned in online, it distilled a sliver of modern celebrity imbroglio, a collision of outward image, inner motivation, and the ceaseless court of public opinion that juries itself on scandal, hearsay, and moral estimation. The tension gave way, as the evening wore on, to a brittle consensus. Some of the guests carried on with their conversations, but the undertow of the chats coursed in hushed tones of rumor and disdain. Buzz on social media showed no signs of letting up. The scandal and the unexpected arrival inspired a never-ending cycle of posts, shares, and comments that carried the story out of the Festivosphere and into the world. And by the end of the night it was clear that Meghan Markle's in-your-face, defiant, controversial and divisive appearance would continue to make waves in the media, in the public domain and in the court of opinion for days and weeks to come. The scene at the Emmy parties was a vivid illustration of how precarious a fame can be. A reputation could be made and broken the very next moment, depending on perceptions, the response a person elicited and the unrelenting gaze of one's peers and of society. When Meghan made the decision to gatecrash the room, however, it was not just a social maneuver. It was an audacious gamble that had consequences that reverberated far beyond one evening. The alcohol-inflicted incident and the fallout that followed on Saturday night were public manifestations of a broader narrative that is centered around celebrities, public expectations, and the regular pressure of life under the microscope. As the night drew to a close, much remained unclear. What are Meghan's options for handling the aftermath? What would it mean, exactly, for her to preserve her continued relationships with Hollywood insiders, the press, and her public image? Was it possible for her to bounce back, or was this just a turning point, the symbolic break in her carefully constructed image? The replies weren't always immediately or easily interpretable, but the appeal was real. This wasn't just one thing that happened. It was part of a wider story that brought together individual hopes, community opportunity, and that most toxic tango between celebrity and modern media landscape. The story was still coming to light, and the ripples of that evening would play out in press coverage, social media chatter, debates, industry gossip, and, perhaps most importantly, in whatever choices Meghan herself would make in the days and weeks to come. Each step, each pronouncement or public appearance that followed would be measured against it. The night she crashed an uninvited introduction, heard mudslinging from the audience, and saw the rapid and fiery response in the virtual space. It was a night that distilled into a formula the volatile, thrilling, and merciless soul of celebrity. A night that would later define her. The initial shock and disapproval turned into something sharper, something more pointed, more focused, as Meghan made her way through the crowds. It was more than just disapproval, it was palpable, working tension that seemed to follow turned her everywhere she went. Invitees, all of whom had expected to be in and out, were now immersed in a vortex of doubt. The chatter came to an abrupt halt, and the most unaffected spectators were made a little uncomfortable at the celebrity circus. Though Meghan was calm, she couldn't disguise that she was at the eye of a social and digital storm. Every eye in the room, whether in curiosity, in judgment, or just flat-out disbelief, was trained on her. There was a brief halt of chatter by the drinks, the sound of glasses clinking replaced by murmurs of gossip. A gaggle of Emmy nominees quieted in mid-conversation as if an electric charge had taken over the airspace around her. One veteran performer sidled up to a colleague and summed up the night in a quiet whisper. She was an intruder, disturbing evening, flouting convention, and throwing order into the delicate organization of the event. She became the subject of collective disbelief, and it anecdotally reflected what thousands of spectators were thinking. Even as the first burst of social media posts began, video of her entrance was going viral. Video of Meghan's mix of calm confidence and determined poise spread quickly and was the talk of the internet. The comments varied from full-on rants to banter as the brutal digital world intervened. At the very epicenter of the digital storm, Meghan felt an undercurrent of tension, though she remained outwardly composed. What was so commonplace, presence, had now filled the whole world in the online world. Security was sleeping and then rears up with renewed vigilance as the Arcana regulars stealthily plodded forward with wary looks following her every step. They understood that something minor could turn into something major. Meghan's steady, purposeful walk let me know she was ready for this inspection. Each shift was a dance between showing herself and avoiding provocation. And yet she may as well have been daring the impossible, because for all the care with which she tread the space for celebration, she was taking steps as precarious as walking a tightrope without a safety net. Whispers turned into a direct confrontation as Meghan was approached by a stunned yet firm event coordinator. "Excuse me, ma'am, you're not invited," he said, speaking in a tone that was both authoritative and polite and with a sense of urgency. Meghan's response seemed strategic, perhaps even rehearsed. She had a small smile, cocked her head, and delivered a calm, "I'm not breaking any rules here" response, explaining her way around the policies without admitting any harm. It was a short little exchange that got caught on various cameras, and soon the clip was being used by the audience in the moment and by the virality of the online. Meanwhile, the hack that started previously only got worse. Screens that had first broadcast event schedules and sponsor adverts now showed images and text that left it in doubt that Meghan had professional integrity and spotless personal choices. Whispers that had been murmuring around for months became announced live, as rumor-mongering became live theater. It was the first time the woman, someone who was used to media scrutiny, had to navigate an in-person and digital confrontation. The room was filled with tension, worsened as new revelations appeared on screens throughout the room and by whispered conversation emanating from the tables. In the crowd, responses were mixed. There are those who would rather not have anything to do with the situation, and they are hiding in their calm chambers and talking in secret, and they refuse to join this whirl of deviancy rising in the social stew. Still others were drawn by curiosity, suspending disbelief long enough to watch the brazen actions of a woman who had cultivated a media maelstrom around herself. And then there were those who simply hated the dish. As they turned around, their faces fell as they took in the lack of manners and the abrupt end to the carefully planned occasion. What had been a managed party room had become a raw meeting place where individuals' reputations, public image, and deeper social tensions bumped up against one another. When Meghan descended to the main floor, she could feel the weight of whispered speculation and the pointed stares of some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. The director, whose latest series was currently in the running for awards galore, stared at Meghan with a mixture of wiry fascination and disbelief playing on his features. Not a word being spoken, they understood each other in the silence. It was both audacious of Meghan to show her face like that, and unhelpful. Imprisoned as an outsider, she had already disrupted the dynamics of the camp just by showing up. All of Meghan's gestures underscored that she had crashed into a place she had not been formally invited into, and she had turned the encounter into a place in which, at that moment, power dynamics, influence, that sort of resource, public attention, were being reconfigured on the fly. And in the meantime, behind her, the hack still posted waves of hybrid messages that mixed reporting, speculation and rumor to the audience both in the room and out there on the internet. The dynamic between Meghan's embodied self and the digital outrage that surrounded her created a tangled narrative of disorder. No longer was she simply an audience member, she had become the central protagonist in a story composed of both gushing and skepticism. Each of her decisions and gestures would now be picked apart and publicized in various media. In that moment, Meghan's face showed the tiniest flicker of calculation. The hawking eyes, the omnipresent cameras, the muffled whispers, the ubiquitous screens suffocated her. All of her movements and looks were staged, carefully created to make a spectacle for audiences and to handle a certain level of scrutiny, which were particularly intense at the time. Having spent a lifetime of working on high-pressure Hollywood and royal sets, she also brought with her a toolkit, fine-tuned for navigating these complex social habitats. Even so, however rehearsed, those displays of composure couldn't wholly protect her from the capriciousness of an audience that had gone from grudgingly recognizing her to judging her. The atmosphere was tense, and as a curious spectator asked the question we were all thinking, it landed like a not-so-subtle challenge. Meghan answered confidently and with a steely edge, nothing apologetic about her thoughts and words. Although she subtly alluded to high stakes, she was aware she was amid this intensely public moment, with cameras recording every inflection of the voice, pause, facial expression. She understood that social media and her critics would pore over her full statement, that it would be dissected frame by frame, replayed ad nauseum online and reviewed by speaking heads wanting to infer her motives, character, or intent. The evening had become, at that point, an unknown show of social power and public exposure. I felt like a spectacle in a too complex and layered a way, ringing alarms, feeling alcohol in my system, and seeing my digital privacy was simultaneously invaded. For Meghan it was a trial of her stamina, composure and insight into how to play things, handling the immediate social pressures on the one hand alongside the longer-term fallout of a story that was starting to take on a life of its own. What transpires in that night's scene would then not only color the ways in which the public interpreted her behavior at the Emmys, but also have a knock-on effect on the ebb and flow of public opinion, press coverage, and the always-changing landscape of celebrity influence. Every move made, every look shared, every answer given was material for the tale that would be retold, dissected, and recast from countless angles and platforms within the glittering, high-stakes world of Hollywood arrows and darts. It was more than just an event, it was a crucible of ambition, courage, and consequence. The night moved on with its strange double consciousness that is Hollywood. On the other, there was the parade of carefully orchestrated grandeur that was an Emmy nominee reception, the elegant gowns, the clinking of glasses filled with aged champagne, the sparkle of jewelry designed to catch the eye of every camera. But on the other hand, a clanging note was struck by Meghan Markle's presence, an invasion that unbalanced the night, a note of chaos and unpredictability. It was at this fragile nexus of attraction and debate when the air of the event started to deteriorate. This celebration had been carefully crafted to exude an air of exclusiveness, where an invitation was a desired signifier of status in an industry where visibility was power. Everything from the lighting down to even who sat where was finely calibrated to maintain a hierarchy and an atmosphere of reverence. But Meghan's arrival shattered this status quo, defying the time-honored guest list as an unspoken covenant between gatekeepers of Hollywood, gatekeepers who somehow kept the guests judged deserved the privilege of its inner sanctum. She advanced further into the room, and the onlookers passed glances that were at once curious and apprehensive. It was a moment that was larger meaning just about the night's nominees and what they had done. It was now a show, focused on a woman who had once been the object of the world's fascination, sticking herself into a party where she wasn't wanted. The normally icy Hollywood A-listers were more relaxed than ever before. Some attempted to hide their unease with courteous smiles, but the body language and defensive body language, the backing off even of the soldiers, the crossed arms and the sidelong glances told it all. The room's equilibrium had been disrupted on some level, and I could sense it in every subliminal encounter. The booze that began with the first selection stunned a lot of the establishment, which set a tone for what followed. It began as a low grumble but picked up quickly. A minority of those present at the entrance voiced opposition, with safety in numbers maybe feeding the dissent. The boos were not deafening at first, but their edge filled the room. The remarks were not lost on others and contained a charge. Other voices joined in, until the sound became one of a common, slicing cacophony in the high ceilings and chandeliers of the grand space. It was the unmistakable sound for Meghan. She'd weathered criticism before, from tabloid headlines to televised debates and publicized interviews examining her choices. But there was something unique about the sound of alcohol resonating in a physical space. It felt urgent, unmediated, direct. It proved to be a steady freak flag of the ever-widening gap she experienced between herself and the world to which she'd once passionately aspired. Nevertheless, she continued forward. Because she'd been raised to believe that to lose your composure equals defeat, so the gall rise can be difficult to suppress, but at this point I don't think there's any other emotion under the sun to feel in the face of so much pressure. Non-booing fans reacted in different ways. Those who did, clapped dully, embarrassed for their lives, not so much out of respect as out of a native instinct to offset malice with a form of courtesy. Others murmured into their phones, perhaps texting or recording notes to share with their media contacts. But some stood vaping and motionless as if caught between curiosity and discomfort, hesitant to publicly express support or disapproval. The varying responses only added to the slightly surreal quality of the whole thing. This was not at all the harmonious, controlled celebration we expected to see. It had become a social battlefield, with Meghan at its expanding epicenter. It was then that the breakage started to assert itself more unequivocally. The screens hanging at intervals around the room, which had been playing highlights of Emmy-nominated performances and backstage snapshots, began to flicker. From the get-go, the crowd just thought it was a technical glitch. Then came stark and disquieting messages against the glossy canvas of the evening. Texts popped up on screens, calling for Meghan in ways that specifically echoed, in invective and fury, old arguments long crackling in the lower levels of British tabloid coverage but never extinguished. Somehow it was as if the gleaming digital came together with the desperate bustle of the physical to make sure this was magnified 1,000-fold in an implementation of scrutiny that would not stop, in a fury of judgment that could not be ignored. There were words chosen in those messages, well, strategically prodding into Meghan's Hollywood past and reviving the old controversies about how she became a star. Some focused on her time as a royal, trying to remind everyone of the various scandals that dogged her and Harry's every move across the globe. Some even targeted her honesty, motive, and whether she was who she claims to be, eliciting gasps among attendees, some in disbelief at the nerve of the hack, others in laughter at the brazenness of it all. Phones were hoisted high, capturing, yes, Meghan, but also the screens that had been hacked, so that a narrative was created, one that would soon be shared across the venue and beyond, into screens clicked around the world, and into the attention spans of millions more. In just a few minutes, the combination of chaos and hacked messages produced a spectacle that the event has never seen. Meghan was no longer just an uninvited guest. It was now an absolute upset, hijacking the storyline of the evening. What used to be a celebration of the best achievements in television instead became a national media controversy surrounding one man. And the nominees and contenders for Emmy Awards who had worked so hard to be noticed found their moment diminished. Their faces were the pictures of frustration and disappointment, being unwitting participants in a scandal that threatened to ruin their hard-earned victory. Security surrounded Meghan, but not just for her protection. There was a hesitation about them, as if they were not quite sure whether their business was to conduct her away or protect her from insult. Organizers raced to whisper to each other frantically as their carefully planned timetables were quickly tossed out of the window. Given their talent for pivoting, producers and publicists could quickly readjust their plans. They knew that the next morning's front-page story would shift from the client nominations to the uninvited woman who had burst in. The space was suddenly filled with confrontation and show. Every movement made by Meghan was carefully catalogued, analyzed, and disseminated at lightning speed over the internet. Even the moment that she exchanged words with a waiter carrying a tray of champagne was seized upon, pointing out any awkwardness as onlookers remarked on her apparent mood. Meghan's silent interaction with one of the nominees left everyone guessing. Was it a glance of approval, rebellion, or a silent cry for help? Every second continued to be profound in value, and every move was meat for a lurid audience that thirsted for every scrap of detail. As the night wore on, Meghan was both a breadwinner and a prisoner in a circus she'd unwittingly whipped up simply by turning up, a useful reminder of the very thin line between consent and public opinion. Some praised her alleged insolence, while others expressed disdain for what they perceived as hubris. Others, meanwhile, were simply enchanted, unable to look away. For Meghan, it was a demonstration of strength, a struggle to keep herself in check in a gale of circumstance. For the others, it was a reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control, no matter how carefully a situation had been orchestrated. And beneath all of the noise, there was a quieter truth. The boos, the whispers, the murmurs weren't just about Meghan Markle herself, but about the symbolic value she carried over and above her own individual life. To others, she came to represent dissent against custom. She epitomized privilege without sacrifice in a room that was full of the very best of Hollywood, an unexpected presence prompting people to recalibrate their very notions of stardom, authenticity, and the casualties of ambition. She served as a mirror for everyone's relationship to celebrity culture, for those who were both intrigued and disturbed by the reflection. As the evening went on, the room grudgingly tolerated her presence. Chatter quieted not due to a decrease of ill will, but because she lost her sense of being a novelty and became routine. No one else's jaw dropped anymore, but they lingered, a pesky reminder of how wrong things had gone. People started talking again, casting nervous looks my way. She was calm, resolved to stay even though she was not initially invited. While she had faced early pushback, the open question was the price she would ultimately pay. It was everything beyond little mundane occurrences of the day that counted most this night. The fallout from tonight will reverberate well beyond the Emmy celebration itself, making its crash on splashy headlines, in the court of public opinion, and in Meghan's own star status within both Hollywood and culture writ large. This chapter wasn't closed yet, but the prologue was written, whispers of alcohol and hacked screens blindingly obvious. In those opening pages, Meghan Markle's name was just one more thread in a story that is guaranteed to grab attention well beyond the glittering world of an Emmy nominee's bash. The surprise of the hack turned quickly from spectacle to consequence, even taking the most media-aware members of the audience unawares. What started that morning as harmless novelty and would be morning's meme had quickly become a thing of its own, in the time it took the best teaser or to scroll through sponsor ads of yesterday's nominated scenes. Screens had changed from benignly dull to blinking like the neon at an 80s disco. Subtle to the extreme in black, the tech staff appeared as if from the wings and side council, and became the leads on a theater stage. Their radios murmured gently, and their eyes, usually scanning the crowd in mundane times, were on each other. The room felt like it was being watched, closely, not just by them but by the cameras, by some other invisible force that had inserted itself into the digital weave of the event. Meghan was at the heart of it, a lone and cryptic figure in a room designed to decode. Still, around her were myriad small stories taking shape. Even a prominent showrunner stopped short in conversation, as if something grand should be projected on it. His compromise, threading ASN, Auden, Sinclair, Neruda, at the bride's parlor lined with PVC via the TV, sound and image in the crypt and image sequences onto the screen at the speed of text, then before you notice swoops into a sponsor's logo, as if the medium itself were obscene. The award-nominated actress, who had been receiving congratulations, instinctively switched gears to make the moment about Meghan. It was as if the room atmosphere had changed permanently and all in focus was now attracted to a different center of attention. "It's going to come back to haunt them," a cinematographer grumbled. And there is the publicist, already typing, who feels both disbelieving and hopeful, a career at stake, an opportunity potentially in the works. The leaked messages did not fit into one narrative. They arrived in fragmented pieces. Just 1 second, a little reality check. This was followed by an inquisitional inquiry into possible motivations and then an enigmatic statement seemingly designed more to obfuscate than to elucidate, and for which heads were tilted to the side for clarification. No obvious perpetrator. No overt political message, no easily dismissible prank. It's a sweet spot of least detail to feel intentional, yet enough that it stays just off-kilter. People were forced to write their own stories about Meghan. This is the hack's ultimate, or successful, power. If one can even call something so foolish power, it didn't have to actually claim anything, just as long as others can make the narrative for it. The stereo never quite spun out of control, but a hairline crack appeared in its surface. For the event soundtrack, a DJ had been paid to put together a curated list of understated hits. They started to turn the knobs of the soundboard with a clenched jaw, quickly fixing snafus before they had fully intruded into the main speakers. Production support jumped in there fast enough to pull the plug, then reroute and reboot. The proudly coordinated screens fell out of sync. During an exciting montage, a sponsored segment aired and, thanks to a schedule card superimposed over a shot of the red carpet and an animated segment that stuttered like it was afraid to make a move, nothing happened. None of these things in isolation had been disaster, but altogether they seemed to me to form a kind of overture. Between the slight lull and the next flash of brilliance, the audience had righted their drinks that had ebbed and flowed like a tide tight after a rogue wave. Attention shifted. Guests had ceased talking about the projects they were working on and begun muttering under their breath about security provisions, who controlled guest lists and device access, and which Wi-Fi network they were going to use. The quiet entry of a team of cybersecurity nerds looking sleek in black suits and white sneakers brought a whole new texture to the evening. They did this, not breaking silence, underlining the impression of a serious business in hand. Padding around the peripheries, looking indoors, asking questions softly but urgently. Meghan sensed the suspicious eyes close around her like a noose. A cell phone camera aimed at her from the left and another from the right. She tensed, regained control of her expression even in her instinctual self-protection. She had great style, but it was raw. A professional at managing her responses, she accepted a glass of water from a server who failed to hide his shaking hands across the room. She caught the eye of a producer old enough to remember when news traveled slowly, not in seconds, like it did now. It wasn't an angry or judgmental glance, but one of acknowledgement. He had seen this movie before. He had become a symbol for a larger argument, a lightning rod for anxieties in search of a place to land. There was speculation that someone in the control booth had actually tracked the original digital anomaly to a device that was at the venue, not a continent away. It was moments like these that changed sides, inflamed suspicions, made the menace a tangible reality instead of an abstract possibility. The possibility that he might have been an insider changed the calculus. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the unplanned arrival of Meghan. It was an affront to the event and a breach of the tacit compromise among the few that what happens beyond the velvet rope is orderly, curated, handled. Meghan didn't shrink from the crowd, but instead moved along its sides, where scrutiny was less apparent, and one's opportunities to take the room's measure multiplied. She passed a small knot of stylists arguing heatedly over whether the incident would overshadow the glamorous gowns and media coverage the next day. She then walked past a pair of actors speaking with their agent and debating whether a photo with her might be seen as an endorsement, or a complication, of the night's marquee plotline. They said no at first, then had second thoughts, then said no again. And further along, she found a tech investor explaining to a director how these attacks played on the spectacle itself, disrupting the visibility to become the medium. The longer she stayed, the more the occasion became a day of judgment. Was she going to be an act of defiance or a strategic ploy? It was either an anti-shame vote or a misreading of the national mood. The questions were not demanding answers, but involvement instead. And that engagement fueled the flames. For all intents and purposes, like all juicy scandals, it blossomed with attention and grew with each interaction. An event manager made a second effort, with backup this time, a woman who projected a subdued authority suggesting she was either someone who could stop the night with a word or who knew someone who could. The exchange was polite, but the surface was fragile in the pitiless light of the screen. Meghan's reaction was muted, almost considered. The coordinator listened, nodded and left. The gathering, with no clear consensus to escort her or not escort her, would look back the cough and slowly digest its presence, one awkward moment at a time. Online. The light of the evening expanded a glimpse of her first entering the apartment. Broken down into a series of variations, each with a different soundtrack, all playing to create the cinema of that one moment, the frozen still of her face. Eyes partially illuminated. Lips pursed and unreadable, now became the central point to a series of discussions and arguments that went right off track and extrapolated numerous varying interpretations from that one moment, concluding in the several tales spun on personal opinions. Rumors swirled, from a furtive cautionary tale about her warning not to come, to an alternative version that a prominent was issuing invitations against custom. The speculation of the breach being a public stunt blended with the dark suggestion that it may have served as a warning. The digital world wasn't revealing the truth, it was serving up various truths for the audience to pick from, like they pick apples or strawberries. At the venue, the stage manager made the call to strategically lower the screen. Nearest the main bar, the crowd reacted to the dimming like a gust of cold air, watching to see if other displays would go dark, too. They did not. The semi-darkness added intimacy to the place and made it feel less of a canteen, which was a relief. Behind them, chit-chat would swerve for a moment into other subjects, only to swerve immediately back to the subject at hand. The night couldn't go on as if nothing had happened, it could only pretend for a little, one mentioned before the focus snapped into place at the center, around the step and repeat. One nominee was kindly cajoled by a publicist into doing a short interview with a streaming entertainment channel. The interviewer had played it safe, had sidestepped the sort of questions that were too obvious, trying to travel the path between prudence and bravery. The clear was tantalizingly just beyond the reach of the microphone, but booming there in the silence. At the end of the segment, the nominee looked towards Meghan, with what appeared to be a mix of empathy and political calculation on their face. That pity, and that calculation, was an expression of the personal and of the career that was about to be launched into tomorrow's headlines. The word spread of another rumor that the hacker was releasing again at midnight. What was true or not none can now tell. One great thought of impendence of danger had been struck into all hearts. Midnight became a palpable moment in time, something toward which people directed their thoughts. Would the party continue? Would Meghan remain? The spin doctors would have been all over it, and the hangover cleanup crew would be dealing with precisely that, because when you're impossibly hungover, the ticking of time acquires a distinct form with each maddening minute of much-needed sleep waiting in the wings. Meghan was meeting a writer who, from the earliest moments on television to the revolutionary years that followed, had covered her while she was reporting. The writer on their part, while never openly spiteful in the tales, wove an extra dimension around their entanglement. They were not overt foe nor trusted ally, but a professional skilled at writing sentences that would serve up a pair of conflicting truths with artful flourish. They exchanged few words save for the shots that rang out. A look which told everything that words could not express. It expressed silently the sense of the charged air about them. They both knew the air was bad, but they also knew that to get through nights like these it didn't take knowing, but it took technique. Behind the scenes, without most of the people in the room knowing, a quiet triage was taking place. A dignity-defying crisis communications team quickly set up a makeshift fortress in the face of adversity, laptops humming, information freely flowing on shared screens that seemed to have lives of their own. Every 20 seconds, two opposite courses of action that were like fortified cities sprang up on either side of a seething river. One argued for withdrawal, for saving face. The other was an advocate of the simple power of resistance against the narrative that would be not anything other than resistant. Only when the chamber itself started to bang soon did they think about leaving. Each of these strategies were good for factors neither could control, and both had potential dire consequences. It was a choice not to predict the results but a choice between which danger they wanted to put their name on. Turn the Kyber glass over and reflect the new enigma. Translated, this might go on to read at the place. Just then, the enigmatic manipulative hacker, in either solo or blended action, proceeded to unveil mysteriously a new enigma. The monitor didn't flicker or stutter, it just exchanged a comforting slideshow for a plain black slate adorned only with one pensive line of text. I wait. This non-blaming sentence was a carefully constructed and melodic question. The room did not gasp, it held its breath, suspended in a momentary gap. The question was implicitly asking what the implications are of a breach for attention of the rules on the rule-abiding. The question, left unsaid, hung thickly in the air, making the audience hear it without having been asked. The screen hung around, giving the chamber space to breathe, for them to consider, before sliding silently back into the loop of nominees, grinning, crying, nodding, ascending, for a precious stretch. Shame moved through the room like a draft, not directed at anyone in particular, but rather a communal realization that everyone had been part of the event that was raging out of control. At that moment, some audience members leaned in, others looked away, some conversations grew real, quiet. It was clear that the people present remembered why they got together, and some were renewing their vows to the rapturous tale that had gripped them at the outset. Both of the responses were real, both were responses worth reporting. The feeling of the night, though, was not broad enough to fully contain both thoughts. When Meghan's decision finally came, it was understated. She stayed crouched and wedged herself alongside a pillar, watching the exit and the closest screen. Without moving a muscle, she transmitted a message of no escape and no aggression. It had become a tactic, giving the spectators no new angles and the intruder no new tactics. This short break enabled the AV team to solve any technical issues rather than have to chase Meghan across the room. It was a relief, a moment for the tension to relax a bit. When one looked closely, one could see the room come to terms with the possibility of recovery. The DJ tried an upbeat number but chose a gentle, soothing tune. A waiter refilled the ice trough, a nominee laughed genuinely, not that practiced camera-ready laughter. A publicist glanced down at her watch and released a silent shudder of happiness, because if this equilibrium held for another 20 minutes, the headlines might begin to change from confusing to complicated. A better story to manage. A foothold was found as the cybersecurity team was discussing its approach during morning briefings. Network segmentation formed itself as a seam. One screen smoothly peeled back and held firm. Another thought twice before it read between the lines. The fearful menace did not recur. If anything, the intrusion seemed to have reached a draw, or to have been a drive-by form of message delivery. A silence so round that one could almost hear the clacking of keys over the sighs, mute the unspoken contract that pretended to bring back the note of familiarity. In that delicate piece, a turning point took place in the dead of night, ignored by 100 phones scrolling and not even deemed newsworthy. Meghan thanked a particular staffer in the interview. Not because a camera was trained on her, not because the staffer wore a headset that was a visual symbol of authority, but because she'd caught sight of the name tag and taken the time to extend a gentle word when it would have been really easy just to whiz past in a blur. The staffer, nonplussed, silently nodded and pushed forward, an unspoken make-up attempt. It wasn't a strategic move. It was a token, one that had no material economic value, and that changed not a single headline. It fucked things up in a way the room wouldn't be able to process until later, when memory began rounding the edges of the night, until only the pieces that didn't quite fit would remain. Midnight inched closer without incident. Nevertheless, the whispering did its work, holding the room on the jump as though it were in the house of rising jet lag, there in the ballroom. The host returned, tactfully nodding to the technical disruptions without even using the word hack. And for a final montage, it played straight through, the audience clapping for real. As the crowd dispersed in a delicately handled choreography of such grand events, there was a murmur of an unease permeating atmosphere. Every word of leave-taking of the event had its own meaning. Early departures meant protest, late leaving meant fidelity, and rightly judged departures, freedom. #Megxit and filed by Meghan Markle at 5:36 p.m. the next day. On that day, ironically, Meghan makes strategic move to leave neither first nor last, and two-faced media cameras, thus allowing herself to skirt past the cameras without allowing them to either exercise weariness or to salivate in those images. The seconds lead up to masks opening like a film release, and then the door opened once again. Some stares feasted on her of their own volition, embarrassedly, while others turned away, considered that she had had her share already for the night. The last thing she heard wasn't glasses clinking or laughter, it was the hum of the party writing itself, rescripting the story it wrote to accommodate the events of the night but somehow still filing the night away as a victory. Beyond the boundaries of the evening, the nighttime carried promises that the world was vaster than a single room, that fresh air could unravel thoughts, that sensational headlines would mill and twist, and that the uncertainties of tomorrow presented their own trials. Outside, cars waiting for names idled, a few independent photographers were staking the situation out, hoping for one last picture. Inside, the staff members worked furiously to start the reset, to clean up the gaudy thick traces of nerve-wracking voltage that already made the event pulse. A few minutes ago, a tech had turned off the final monitor and let the screen fade into total black, then he rubbed his eyes with a hand that was shaking from fatigue, a performative gesture that also served to mark the end of his night, to set the expectation that he'd be typing up the night's events in a technical report tomorrow. He concentrated on writing about ports and permissions, and he left talk of mood and meaning to others. And what lasted was not an end, but a shape. The night had achieved a form to endure certain particulars. I'll bet, however, that the whole time you were there, not another soul intruded and so got treated bluntly. The digital layer, too, got in a word, conveying a simultaneous feeling of relation to the script and untamedness. And here were people behaving in their normal ways, singing, judging, defending, feigning kindness, trying to be right, to be safe, to be intrigued. A woman who was used to being under the microscope decided to stay under it longer than anyone else had. Rightly, I don't. Things aside, she may even have indirectly answered the unasked question of the anonymous, textual you printed upon the black ground. For what price does a rule toll, when you break it for attention? The night seemed to answer with a ledger that would stir each man to his own reading. Remained open until after everyone had totted up the final score, the car driven away and the hush illumination of the marquee revealed the event lighting to have appeared cheap, tawdry and oxygen-starved in comparison. The disaster team closed their laptops and agreed on a single term to describe the night, one that neither conceded defeat nor victory elsewhere. A journalist wrote and saved 2 versions of a few sentences, waiting to see which one would seem most authentic when it appeared online the next morning. The rewriting went on slowly, rather like a shower falling through a town, rather than a storm. With Meghan's name being the only thought on my mind, one topic of the Google searches persisted till dawn. And now, the nominees, too, were starting to get a sense of what was in store for them, in coverage that was often framed with a certain compassion, about trying to maintain the dignity of the nominees. In this decidedly different environment, industry newsletters were businesslike in tone, with newfound insights and increased resilience now being bandied as if resilience could be downloaded like a software update. Intimate conversations, meanwhile, pushed the industry forward into the night. The manner in which people wrote emails, issued party invitations and endeavored to keep cool changed. The next chapter will not be written for or by screens or crowds, both of which will most certainly playing bit parts on its stage. Instead, the era will be described by the decisions made once the adrenaline recedes and calm returns, decisions on what to say in public, what to avoid dwelling on, the way to go or not to go, the people to meet or dismiss, the moments to capitalize on or step away to help bring about change. Nights like these linger. They refine the burning brew that flows down the throat, becoming a part of the chest, going along with the ego that which now knows, one has been through, pretty sure you've been through something significant, now add it to your life. The aftermath of screens breached and reverberating cries of celebration had cast the Emmy party in a heightened, tense approximation of normalcy. Talking continued, laughter tentatively between as the night unfolded. But behind the brilliant mask of the event had been cracked. Hollywood's veneer of glamour was unable to mask the effect of Meghan Markle's presence on the day. And despite an apparent attempt to recenter the focus on the nominees and the evening's supposed splendor, everyone's gaze kept falling back on her. I felt every one of her movements ripple through the crowd, a continuous frustration of the tipping point yet to come. The reaction was one of frustration combined with resignation for many nominees who had put years into arriving at this past moment of recognition. They knew, without a word being said, that Meghan's arrival had recast everything they had achieved in a new light. In previous years, the nominee party had offered an airlock of sorts, a night to quietly celebrate before the swirl of the Emmy Awards kicked in. But that feeling of safety was shattered this evening. Publicists gathered with their clients, strategizing to minimize the fallout and crafting statements to make sure that their clients' participation wasn't drowned out by Meghan's glow. An actor, sipping champagne nervously, murmured to a compatriot that tomorrow's headlines would not be about the art of storytelling, but about the unwelcome intrusion of Meghan Markle. His companion nodded, taking in the gravity of his words. The repercussions extended further outward. Reporters, ever in search of anomalies, found their stories all but writing themselves. An industry report was about to turn into a story of conflict, scandal, and intrigue. A shadow from the day Meghan crossed the threshold, becoming the lead story to which all other stories would dim down. editors across the city started calling on reporters to tell not just what the facts were but also how the place felt. How did the moments leading to the eruption of violence unfold? When the screens glitched, when even Hollywood appeared to have thrown someone it had once embraced off the screen? These questions would guide how the media reported the story, and the coverage would shape public opinion. In this fragile ecosystem, Meghan herself was becoming a litmus test for those around her. Also, some of them in silence saying, "I just wanted to give my name to counterbalance raining stones of curses washing the lady's heart." They smiled for the cameras, made small talk and conducted themselves in a manner that can now be staged as grace under pressure. Still others chose distance, stepping back and never allowing themselves to be caught in her orbit, a kind of aversion that was just as eloquent as open disapproval. Those split-second decisions would echo for weeks, as media organizations dissected seating arrangements, photo backdrops, and short clips shared online. At the same time, Meghan was herself a subject of constant observation, not just by the cameras but by all the prying eyes that sought to read into her. All her little movements, her self-control, her answering of reality to her best ability, her possible pretense of not being ashamed, everything about her was read, her poise, her defiance, her defeat. Like all interpretations, it said as much about the looker as it did about Meghan. To some she was an emblem of stoic endurance of the world's cruelties, to others, an innocent of the social graces and a party guest who hadn't got the memo about party etiquette, a woman tumbling over the lines between connection and detachment. These first impressions as they crystallized in the present would become stories. As night turned to day, the buzz did quiet some, by it did not go away. A whiff of after effects hovered in the air in stares that darted at screens and the slight pauses when new visuals appeared. The system was back up and running, but the possibility of a crash still hung unseen in the air. Guests speculated to themselves about who could have been behind the hack and why they would have singled out Meghan in particular. Coincidence, exploitation, or malicious intention? And that sort of nightmare of something, that sinister lurking uncertainty, was a power. For Meghan, the connection between her physical presence and the digital incursion was clear. Even if the actual person behind it all remained unknown, it turned up the volume on her intrusion, made sure it rang distantly in opposition to the intrusion not happening, so that the incident couldn't be played off by merely saying everything had been made right. It had grown something more complicated, more incendiary. Later in the night the mood became one of endurance. Participants held on to a semblance of normalcy, but signs of the new reality were impossible to ignore. That Meghan even showed up cut straight through the social hierarchy of the tournament, and forced people to confront just how fragile their standing in that social strata was. Those at the top of the industry hierarchy did a risk calculation about what being associated with her might do to their position. The aspirants anxiously worried they would be overshadowed. The content accepted the spectacle as the latest piece in the never-ending tapestry that is Hollywood drama. Yet behind all the pain, there was something undeniably interesting going on. There was no looking away. Meghan's sudden entrance, and all the hullabaloo it caused, had turned the night into a drama peopled by antagonists, victims, and sad consequences. In a way, it was potentially more riveting than any fiction the audience could be fed. Actors, producers, publicists and journalists were attending and watching, a part of the drama and also observers of it. They were between having the moment and imagining how those moments would be told and spun, packaged and consumed by millions the next day. It turns out Meghan, by gate-crashing the event, did something counterintuitive. She disrupted the structure of the evening while retaining her centrality to the story. It made no difference how the media depicted her, as the villain, the victim, the instigator, her presence loomed over the actual event she was never supposed to attend. It was a gamble with consequences like the gossip, the whispers that followed that reflected the gamble she had made. But the truth was, people were talking, and tomorrow they would still be talking, something that comes as no surprise to anyone who understands how the insatiable food chain of media works. That meant something even as the night was drawing to a close. It got a little tense, but it was still workable, people still schmoozing. Although there was a sulking undertow of rumor, Meghan held firm. She did not falter, carrying herself calmly in the midst of the obvious animosity. She withstood the judgment, weathered the criticism, and held her own in a place she didn't belong. If people took her resilience as strength or arrogance, she could no longer keep tabs on this. Interpretation was now up to the crowd, and the press, and the public. The consequence of her actions, though, were just getting started. This was no ordinary night at the Emmy nominee party. It developed into a story about reputation, impact, and the peculiarities of celebrity worship. In her unwelcome appearance, Meghan exposed weaknesses not just in her own public face but in the celebrity-making machinery of Hollywood, where scarcity, power, and image were everything. Once its flaws were laid bare, it was as if fixing it was unrealistic. And until the last guest said their goodbyes and retreated into the night of Los Angeles, the story of the night was already sealing itself. It was no longer a story of holiday but one of upheaval. In the middle, Meghan's name shone, a reminder of how a single bold act could instantly alter the course of an occasion, even as staff members cleared tables and wiped glasses following the party. The question that hung in the air was, had Meghan found her renewed relevance, or had she deepened her estrangement? The answer would be outside those walls, in the headlines, in the broadcasts, in the conversations that began to spread over the hours that followed. Before the sun rose in Los Angeles, online narratives were already taking shape. Even as the last Emmy nominees' party guests were heading out and packing it, word in the digital domain was rolling in at a rate of a zillion stories per minute, over all sorts of narratives involving Meghan Markle. Media raced to break headlines before their competitors, influencers circulated cell phone footage, and gossip blogs compared images of Meghan's entrance to the turmoil that followed. In only a couple of hours, the flower-fueled frenzy had spilled out of the ballroom and into timelines and trending feeds everywhere. One of the most shared videos captured the tipping point, the entrance of Meghan into the room. There she is, with her poised posture against the edge of the doorframe, amid a rising tide of murmurs that rose to verbal disapproval. The clip ended with the sound of glassware clanking, resounding under chandeliers. What do you think? Was this Meghan's boldest move or her biggest humiliation yet? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more royal bombshells.